said South Africa had presented a profoundly distorted factual and legal picture.
I like that the framing is also completely just on Israel's side. The framing of the matter is also entirely on Israel's side. Like, okay, yeah, that's what Israel is saying. It's like completely distorted. What are you saying about it? You know what I mean?
The applicant has regrettably put before the court a profoundly distorted factual and legal picture. The entirety of its case hinges on a deliberately curated, decontextualized, and manipulative description of the reality of current hostilities. South Africa purports to come to this court in the lofty position of a guardian of the interest of humanity. But in delegitimizing Israel's 75-year existence in its opening presentation yesterday, that broad commitment to humanity rang hollow.
Yeah. It's like across the board. Across the board, how dare you say that we've done violent things as a nation state? That ultimately means that, like, we are small bean and you're attacking our identity and maybe even deciding to be a Holocaust denier. You know what I mean? I'll just slap on whatever I want. I'll slap on whatever awful, nefarious association I want. Here's a couple things I will say about Israel. Okay? Problem with Israel is that they wanted to do nation state shit, like they wanted to do colonial stuff far too late. Obviously, they didn't have the opportunity to do it when everybody else was doing it, when the going was good. You know, I'm talking like 1700s, 1800s. Like, you pop off back then, there's no internet. There's no, like, web of, I mean, obviously there's no big web of communication. It takes a while by pigeon for information to transfer over. You can get away with a lot of crimes. Okay? Now, the other part of the Israeli nation-state project early on is that they 100%, and maybe this will be controversial for some people. I'm not like diminishing the impact of the Nakba at all, but there is one difference between like the population transfer and the way that they did it. They did try to do it in the most woke way possible. Like, they didn't just straight up rip through. They killed 15,000 Palestinians in the Nakba, right? But they didn't kill like 100,000, 200,000 Palestinians. It would have been crazy to do so right after the Holocaust anyway. Like, people would have been like, that's insane. What are you doing? You have to put a stop to that. And they simply forcibly displaced 750,000 people, right? Instead of just like pulling an America or pulling a Turkey, as a matter of fact. You know what I mean? Like, there have been countries that have engaged in similar things closer to Israel's development, and they didn't really do that. They basically were like, we're just going to butcher one village or a couple villages, 2 villages, 3 villages, and then everywhere else that we go to, they'll be afraid and they'll just leave. And the thing is, you can't do woke genocide. Like, there's no half measures in that situation. And that has just been eating away at the more reactionary components of the ultra-nationalist elements within Israel for generations now. That they're like, there's this constant back and forth of like, why haven't we done the full thing? And the other side saying like, well, you can't do the full thing, with more and more of the Jewish population of Israel getting on board with doing the full thing, right? So, this, for the record, this does not mean that this wasn't a forcible displacement, ethnic cleansing campaign. It absolutely was. I've always maintained this position. I'm simply stating that in comparison to other genocides, it has been a slower burn. And if you are going to do a slow burn genocide, you can't do it. You got to do it fast. Okay? Genocide technique, you have to go in and you have to just like cut it out in like, maximum 10 years. And you can't do it when there's like a lot of communication and a lot of eyeballs on you, right? They thought that they could do it as a slow burn and would get some level of defense from the West. And they did, right? They did. The Western world definitely did originally turn a blind eye to it and then continued to facilitate and support it. And that is a part of the problem. And you can't do that, and you especially can't do that in the 2020s. You can't do that in the 2020s, especially with the entirety of the Western world being on board with your actions. You can't do that in the 2020s with the internet readily available. Or if you do it in the 2020s, you got to do it kind of on your own. You can't really engage in this kind of behavior while also simultaneously, portraying yourself as the victim, right? Because like Jewish people historically do have an argument of being victimized by pogroms, by the Holocaust, but Israel does not have that argument, right? So it's this constant conflation of like, no, we're actually the ones who are striking, but also simultaneously we ourselves are the victims. And that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because like, you hear that argument from the Klan, right? You hear that argument as it pertains to white supremacy in the United States of America. You hear that argument from the Klan. You hear Klansmen benefiting from white supremacy in the South and trying to desperately restore the racial pecking order, while simultaneously talking about how they are the real victims, like black people coexisting and cohabitating next to white people actually is legitimately harming them. But the overarching population looks at that and goes, that's a little ridiculous, dog. How about you calm down? White people also have been, obviously, especially in the Western world, the historically dominant group. The categorization of like whiteness in the Western world implies that you have the power. So you don't have a good argument to make about hate crimes against you in general. If someone sits here and says, oh, there's white genocide, you immediately know, okay, this is a racist person. This person is not all right, right? Israel, on the other hand, can do that if it conflates itself with Judaism and being Jewish, because that is a protected, marginalized subgroup. That is certainly something that is real. It is something that happens. Having said that, however, like I said, you have to cut the two. The idea that like Israel somehow represents the interests of all Jews globally, and that Israel itself is like in and of itself not a nation state, a nuclear nation state that is getting a tremendous amount of military resources and political capital from the Western world in its endless endeavor to forcibly displace millions of Palestinians that it currently occupies. Right? And instead, it's like actually the victim. It's just a nice Jewish family out for dinner, being victim to an anti-Semitic hate crime. It's not the case. Like, you're a military superpower, and you want to have it both ways, and you can't have it both ways. But that's always where the argument comes from. What do you mean they can't? They are, and they will get away with it. I'm not sure I understand what you mean when you say they aren't going to get away with this. I just mean that, like, the truth will always remain. Does that make sense? Like, and the truth will prevail no matter what happens, I think. I feel like there's an issue with that. Like the way that it's covered. Hold on one second. Here's a good thread from a genocide scholar on Israel's defense. We'll get to it in a second, but let's continue.
And in its sweeping counterfactual description,
Israel barely a military power, yet alone a super one, Lamau. No, Israel is definitely a military power. It's a regional, I would say it's a regional superpower, not a superpower globally, but they are definitely a military, it's a militarized state with nukes. I mean, that's crazy. It's not a small being by any means. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter because it has the backing of the United States. Would you say it's a major power? Yes, it's a major regional power.
Of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it seemed to erase both Jewish history and any Palestinian agency or responsibility.
Well, it's the second day of this landmark case, which began yesterday with South Africa presenting its argument. Let's listen back to yesterday's closing statement from the lawyer representing their legal team.
The international community continues to fail the Palestinian people, despite the overt, dehumanizing, genocidal rhetoric by Israeli governmental and military officials.
The conflating of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is so severe that the National Review apparently has issues with teachings about combating anti-Semitism because it's anti-Zionist. That's awesome. San Francisco School District directs teachers the resources that condemn Israeli terrorism as worse than Hamas. That's awesome. They're mad about the way that oh God. That's great. Okay, we'll get to that in a second.
Matched by the Israeli army's actions on the ground. Despite the horror of the genocide against the Palestinian people being live streamed from Gaza to our mobile phones, computers and television screens. The first genocide in history where its victims are broadcasting their own destruction in real time in the desperate, so far vain hope that the world might do something.
Let's cross live now and speak to our correspondent, Anna Holligan, who is in The Hague. And Anna, just bring us up to date with what we've been hearing from both sides, please.
I'm not going to lie. This is the first time I felt FOMO when covering a news story because, I should be there. I could be at The Hague right now, easy. And I feel like I'm missing out. All my goats are there. All the villains are there.
Those powerful statements really give you a sense of just how much the ICJ is a legal battleground for all of this. So today we heard from Israel. They accused South Africa.
I love having a conversation about genocide and openly trying to hit a both sides argument on genocide, which maybe if we were talking about this 8 to 10 years ago, this was a thought experiment. This was merely a thought experiment, one that maybe even my debaters, if I was talking about liberalism and its tendency to always try to be even keeled, even on something as aggressive as genocide, ethnic cleansing. If I use this as an argument, people would say, Hasan, you're exaggerating. Okay. You're a fabulist. Why are you doing this? And now, in my lifetime, in a short period of time since then, I feel like we've arrived at the position where people are genuinely looking at a situation like an ethnic cleansing campaign and saying, let's hear from both sides. Okay?
Africa of weaponizing and trivializing the Genocide Convention pointed out that Israel was one of the first signatories and said that Israel was responding in self-defense under international humanitarian law to attacks by Hamas gunmen. They said those attacks, the atrocities committed by Hamas on the 7th of October, constituted the biggest calculated mass murder of Jews since the Holocaust. You might be able to...
You are rich enough to fly around the world, so it was crazy to think that if you wanted to go live stream world politics around the globe, I could do that, yes. One of the issues for me in live streaming around the world, however, is that the areas that I want to cover, I can't go to for the most part. They are a little bit too dangerous, especially because of the perspective that I have on that coverage. It's just impossible for me to go to Gaza, for example, and have a pro-Palestinian approach to the matter.
To see behind me now, the court hearing has just ended. So yesterday South Africa had 3 hours, today Israel had 3 hours. That's it now in terms of the interim measures hearings. The judges will now go away and deliberate, look at what both sides have said. South Africa, of course, accusing Israel of genocide. Judges have to work out whether or not there is a plausible reason to believe that there could be a risk of genocide in order to rule in favor.
Also, do think that they're both sides' coverage on genocide already is like distasteful, to say the least. But beyond that, they are kind of leaning on the side of Israel as well. It's like the language being used here does almost immediately adopt the Israeli position. It even ends up reaffirming the Israeli propaganda position. For example, Israel's war on Hamas. When you hear that, when people say Israel versus Hamas, right? That in and of itself is an immediate, not even tacit, like open admission that you have taken Israel's propaganda hook, line, and sinker. Because the casualties do not reflect that. The targeting does not reflect that. Israel is targeting Hamas. The attitudes from Israeli Knesset members does not reflect that Israel is targeting Hamas. That is actually the fundamental counter argument that Israel makes, is that they are just simply doing this to combat Hamas, and oopsie, sometimes 30,000 almost people die. So that framing in and of itself immediately adopts the position that Israel wants to adopt. Okay? So that's something to consider. Especially because the entire point of the South African court case is to say there is, one, no real self-defense argument under international law against those who Israel belligerently occupies, okay? Israel is a belligerent occupier. Israel is and by that I mean like belligerent in the war term. Like Israel is a contentious foreign occupier upon the Palestinian population, and therefore there's no real international law defense here for Israel to engage in a self-defense against the Palestinian population. And then one of the more important parts about this is that the entire framing of this Israel versus Hamas battle is that it's not actually Israel versus Hamas, but this is genocidal intent. That's the perspective of the South African delegation, and I agree with that perspective. That framing is completely correct. So anyone that turns around and tries to say, no, you don't understand, actually, this is a war against Hamas. Israel has every right to, combat Hamas. Hamas is who they're trying to deal with, is engaging in my opinion, genocide apologia. And that it's a very commonplace position in the media because a lot of people don't think too much about it, right? Maybe myself, I have probably accidentally slipped up and said Israel versus Hamas in the past as well.
Favor of South Africa, and why this matters. This court doesn't have any powers of enforcement, and if a judgment though goes against Israel and Israel ignores an order from the judges here to cease military hostilities as South Africa has requested, then it will make it very difficult for countries like the UK and the US to continue to support Israel, and we are expecting a decision on this within weeks.
Yeah. So here is a genocide researcher and lecturer, and their take on a genocide survivor as well, their take on their analysis on Israel's defense. This is way, way worse of a defense by Israel than I expected. They are not at all arguing there is no genocide, nor against the fact that they're committing a genocide. They're focusing on jurisdiction in an attempt to get the case out on technicalities. However, I did call it, they're arguing that these individuals, people who have openly expressed genocidal intent, and therefore it can't be a systematic campaign of genocide, attempting to blur the genocidal intent by stating they're speaking as individuals. Now, South Africa's case relies on a direct line of communication from the top down, whether it be the defense minister, whether it be Benjamin Netanyahu, specifically the Amalek terminology that Benjamin Netanyahu used, the biblical terminology, and how that is translated from literally the top position in the state of Israel all the way down to the actual IDF soldiers. publicly reinforcing the narrative. And one of the major pieces of evidence that South Africa has been able to show in this regard has been obviously the Benjamin Netanyahu Amalek sentiment, right? And for those of you who don't know, Amalek is a reference, is a biblical reference to a complete elimination of even the children, the seed of an enemy, right? Of a violent enemy. So it's a genocidal intent coming from that, coming from this like biblical aspect. And what they were able to do yesterday, the South African delegation was able to do yesterday, was show Benjamin Netanyahu and then draw a direct parallel from Benjamin Netanyahu to the soldiers on the ground singing and dancing and celebrating that they are also participating in an ethnic cleansing of and engaging in Amalek as well. Their argument hinges on the argument that the people saying these things, such as Ben-Gvir and the soldiers, aren't part of the war cabinet or IDF command and control, and therefore are not directives from the government to do genocide. That's their, yes, that is their counter to everything that's going on. Because South Africa, first and foremost, is trying to get an injunction and trying to immediately cease hostilities. Like, their goal is to say, these guys have genocidal intent. They're engaging in a statewide genocide, right? As a state, as the Israeli state, and therefore have to stop immediately. For this, you don't actually need to like show the vast amount of human casualties. You can, but you don't even need to show that, because in order for this distinction to pass, in order for this to be seen as the truth, I guess, in order for the court to look at this, in order for someone to consider genocidal intent, you don't actually have to kill, 1 million people. You just have to show the intent directly from top down, from communications and correspondences from people in positions of power all the way down to the individual actors, right? But they, of course, also have human casualties to show for it as well, because Israel has been quite successful in its ethnic cleansing campaign so far. So that's what's going on here. The thing is, how is this defense actually going to work? These are not lower-level individuals who express genocidal intent, but people at the highest levels of Israeli government. It seems as if they are literally scraping the bottom of the barrel for a legal defense. Truthfully, I expected a better defense. Have they even once mentioned the Palestinians? I may be wrong, but I haven't heard it mentioned at all. Focusing on Hamas so much seems misplaced too, as they are not party to these proceedings. They are not an entity or a sovereign state. The gist of Israel's defense comes down to 1, jurisdiction, 2, no dispute between South Africa and Israel, 3, Hamas is actually doing the genocide, 4, oh, that's the other part. They also said that, the real people that should be here on this court today, right now for the crimes of genocide is Hamas. Approximately, what was it? There was a TikToker, the guy with the glasses, the Palestinian guy with the glasses who always like goes on Omegle and talks to Israelis, was actually on TikTok Live watching with a Hamas tracker, and I believe they used it 137 times or something. There was a Hamas tracker that he just crudely put together with a whiteboard. Yeah, his name is Hamza, right? Yeah, here, this is the guy. I did a Hamas counter on my stream while reacting to Israel's response. I counted Hamas 137 times in total. That's nearly one Hamas being said every single minute they were talking.
Counter, probably even more than this, because they say it so much. I probably missed some of them. So 1 every minute on average almost. This is too much. For Hamas not being the issue, this is unacceptable. This is inappropriate. This is not allowed. For Hamas not being the issue, which it is not. If they wanted to target Hamas, then target Hamas. But you are targeting innocent civilians. 12,000 kids have been killed so far in the past 3 months. I'm not talking about any day before that, any day before October 7th. I'm not talking about the thousands of prisoners, quote unquote, which are hostages that are held hostage in jails in the West Bank. thousands of which are not charged for any crimes at all. I'm not talking about them. I'm not talking about the kids that have been dying. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm only talking about since October 7th till today, 12,000 kids have been killed, thousands under the rubble which have not been found. Hundreds of families wiped off the record, wiped off the radar, every single family member, and hundreds of families are completely gone. Last names have been completely demolished. This is unacceptable. Hamas is not the issue. You are killing innocent lives. You are killing kids. You are killing babies. You're killing pregnant women. You are killing innocent people.
Yeah. So that's you know, that's why this defense is bunk. However, just because the defense is bunk doesn't mean that like there won't be political pressure applied behind closed doors, I guess, or that I mean, I don't know how the court is going to decide on this. But yeah, number 4, genocidal intent was out of context and made by individuals. Number 5, calls for provisions by the ICJ cannot stand as Israel refuses to stop. I do not think this is a sound legal defense, so why are they taking this approach? Because I think their goal isn't to convince the judges Israel isn't committing genocide, but rather that they be allowed to do it, it to do given the context, i.e. Hamas. They're speaking to their supporters. They are not trying to change the minds of those who believe they are committing the genocide against the Palestinians. They're trying to get pro-Israeli judges and their supporters to focus on jurisdiction instead as a way to allow them to continue committing genocide. I am particularly interested in their genocidal intent expressed by individuals taken out of context approach is going to work, because the situation is you cannot say the genocidal intent expressed by individuals are taken out of context when one of those individuals is obviously the leader, the other are members of the war cabinet, and then beyond that, it's the defense minister himself who said we are fighting human beasts, and that is precisely the reason why we have to cut their electricity and their food and their water. And not only that, but they also did do that, right? So they did that. Like, these are Knesset members. You can point to them and say, well, those guys are other individuals. Who cares, right? They're speaking on their own. They're passionate, whatever. But you can't say that about Yoav Gallant. Can't say that about Benjamin Netanyahu, and you cannot say that about Ben Gvir either, in my opinion. So I am particularly interested on their genocidal intent expressed by individuals taken out of context approach is going to work. It is similar enough to the Serbia, Milosevic, and even Karadzic defense that the perpetrators were individuals and not acting on behalf of the state. But in Bosnia's case, both at the ICTY and the ICJ, the fact that VRS forces, Serbia paramilitary groups, the YNA, were all technically considered different entities, part of different states, worked in Serbia's favor. Balkanization. Genuinely devastating, but also on top of that was good enough to play defense here for those who perpetrated atrocities. So in this circumstance, there is no division. It's just Israel. It's the IDF. There is no separate entity underneath it, right? And not just that, it is one singular state, but these are members of the highest levels of government and military who have openly expressed genocidal intent. In this defense, if this defense ends up working, it will have horrific ramifications for all genocide cases. Right? Yes, the South Africans did link statements of officials to the actions on the ground. That is 100% true. Anytime any political leader and or state is allowed to absolve themselves of genocide by focusing their defense on individuals and individual crimes, it will have horrific consequence. Might as well just do away entirely with the international courts at that point. Again, with Hamas, which is not part of these proceedings, their entire statement about their humanitarian efforts is genuinely infuriating because of such other bullshit. Israel allows aid into Gaza is such an interesting sentence. It is genuinely infuriating to watch them brag about floating hospitals and water aid as if people in Gaza are not starving, lacking access to water, and if Israel has not destroyed and attacked countless hospitals in Gaza. Israel just utilized the Bosnian genocide case as precedent to allow them to continue committing genocide, i.e. Bosnia was not ruled a genocide and there was no intervention in it Therefore, Israel shouldn't be found guilty of genocide either. Basically saying, because the ICJ did not punish Serbia for the genocide in Bosnia, they should absolve Israel too. However, in the case of Israel, in comparison to Bosnia, the lack of division and the directives coming not from like phone conversations that you were able to intercept and use as evidence, but the direct transmission of genocidal intent, and the fact that there is no division amongst the ranks, and that you can directly pull a string from Benjamin Netanyahu's mouth all the way down to the individual actors on the ground, the soldiers, directly changes the dynamic here. Okay? That is not an argument you can use. This is precisely the reason why so many people that have worked on individual cases in the ICC, the ICJ, have said Israel's genocide there, Israel as the genocidal state, has a profound amount of evidence. It is flagrant. It is all over the place. You can just straight up look at the things that they are saying and look at the things that they're doing without any political division whatsoever. Important to note that there has never been a genocide ruled by the ICJ, and the closest we came to it was Serbia's conviction of failure to prevent genocide. Both South Africa and Israel have mentioned the Bosnian genocide. The South African team did it correctly, and Israel did it precisely what I thought they would do. The Bosnian genocide case was always going to have ramifications. Okay, so we're done. The gist of Israel's defense goes to jurisdiction, self-defense, genocidal intent is freedom of speech, and Hamas is to blame for it all. It is not a strong defense, in my opinion. Yeah. Pretty simple. If I see your IDF ass in a TikTok, you should be getting tried for war crimes. I think across the board, if we were honest, a couple things that I want to mention before I move on to Yemen. If we were honest and we operated in the way that international rule-based order is supposed to operate, every single person that traveled to Israel from other countries that they reside in to participate in this act of ethnic cleansing would be tried if they were to ever return to their home countries, whether it be America, whether it be Australia, whether it be the UK, whether it be any of these nations that these people have dual citizenship in. If you join in on the fun, you deserve to be criminally tried. That is my genuine perspective. That's why I said the Israeli foreign minister guy that recently went back to the UK, what is his name, Elon or whatever, like he, under any other circumstance, would absolutely be tried as a war criminal, as a criminal in general. Okay? The reality is, yes, what was his name? Someone in the chat said it. Elon Levy, I think. Is that his name? Yeah, Elon Levi. Okay? The IDF foreign minister spokesperson. The reality is that's not going to happen, of course, but it would absolutely be the same, and it would happen in any other circumstance. If you had a dual citizen Russian, right, that flew into Russia to go invade Ukraine, okay, willingly, voluntarily, and celebrated it, okay, that person is done. If they ever come back to the United States of America, they're going to be criminally tried, okay? Which is totally fair. That is fair. Fair is fair. Okay? Let's not talk about Russia. Let's talk about Muslims, right? If any Muslim from any Muslim nation went to a Muslim country, okay, and joined in with whether it be a militant group or whether it be a standing army, they would not be able to come back to the Western world without any scrutiny. They would straight up go to jail, okay? And it makes sense, especially if you're joining ISIS, right? This is what happens. People have even lost their citizenship for doing such a thing. But of course, Israel's different because Israel is our ally. Okay? So, the idea that all of these things are totally permissible, and like these institutions are also openly defending it. I mean, it's ridiculous. It makes the rule-based international order, which is something that if you lived outside of the imperial core, you knew that it was already a joke, but it permanently solidifies that there's no real rule-based international order. That just means we make the rules and we give the orders. That's it. And of course, you have some of the Western powers that have openly stated that South Africa's claims against Israel are baseless and that Justin Trudeau doesn't support the premise of the case brought forward by South Africa. So far, Germany, Austria, US, UK, and now Canada have publicly opposed the claims of genocide. Okay? It's unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. Not only that, but Germany has said that it will intervene in the International Court of Justice case on behalf of Israel. Germany will intervene on Israel's behalf as a third party in the International Court of Justice's genocide hearing against Israel, according to the spokesman from Germany's federal government. Okay? Unimaginable, unacceptable, embarrassing, ridiculous. Now, why am I talking about all of this? The ICJ, as many of you said, is feckless, is an institution with no power. It's toothless. What are they going to do? Are they going to stop Israel from committing acts of genocide? No, of course not. They're not going to be able to do that successfully. The point is opening up another pressure valve, right? Well, I guess the opposite. Not releasing a pressure valve, but creating another point of pressure. Okay? And that's very important. It's marginal, it's incremental, but it matters. It matters because there's no other mechanism, okay? And this kind of pressure actually is seen by the rest of the world. This kind of pressure also has staying power in the Western world amongst the citizens living in these countries, just like there is a real reason as to why the Gulf states, which are in many instances desperate to support Israel but can't do it because of the population's attitude towards Israel's crimes of genocide, even in the Western world, especially amongst younger populations, you are seeing an attitude change. This means that people will think twice when America comes out and says, this means something when America comes out and says, like, well, these guys are doing crimes. Okay? Now, even in the Russia case, it was laughable, albeit correct, but still laughable when America was making that argument. Okay? Because it was a country that had done so much violence, the United States of America, coming out and saying what Russia is doing is unacceptable in Ukraine. Only we get to do it, right? And that double standard, I think, is still important, especially when you are moving towards multipolarity. When America's global power and global influence is waning, a diligent, smart leader that ran on restoring the international rule-based order, such as Joe Biden, and correctly pointed to Donald Trump absolutely making America an embarrassing nation, an embarrassing ally, an embarrassment in general. That guy throwing all of that aside for his own zealotry towards Israel is ridiculous. So there's two arguments that I want to make here. On the one hand, you obviously have the moral argument. Israel is doing an act of genocide. Israel is an apartheid state, and we must not help. We must not facilitate in genocide. We must do everything we can to stop this act of ethnic cleansing from happening. So that's the moral argument. That one I've talked about endlessly. But I rarely ever talk about the practical argument. Because when you think about this from the framework of, like, what America's power and dominance means, what America's soft power looks like for the rest of the planet, we look like a clown show to our allies. And they look like clown shows to their own citizens. We look like a clown show to anyone under the age of 44, specifically if they're Democratic Party voters. But we look like an entire clown show to the rest of the world in general, that we cannot rein in our attack dog in the region. Especially when Biden goes on and says, look alive, Jack, we're trying to maybe don't kill so many civilians. Come on. And then you continue to sidestep Congress, and you continue to send the ammunition. You continue to make yourself complicit in this act of ethnic cleansing, and the rest of the world sees that. I would go so far as to say, from a soft power perspective, that's even worse than what Donald Trump would do. Because Donald Trump at least would be like, I love Israel. I hate the Palestinians. They're dogs. They must all be ruthlessly wiped out. And there would be a convergence of ideology there, right? So it would demonstrate strength. It would be devastating from the moral position, of course. Make no mistake. I'm simply telling you, Donald Trump would be worse than Joe Biden, for sure, right? Donald Trump would absolutely be worse than Biden. Biden is continuing on the Abraham Accords and Donald Trump's administration's haphazardly put together Middle Eastern policies. That is the problem here. And Donald Trump would certainly accelerate it further. Donald Trump's administration is part of the reason why we're here to begin with. But having said that, from a soft power perspective, at least Donald Trump would look to be in lock and step with the Israeli allies, rather than the way that Joe Biden is trying to do this like wishy-washy, both sides of the mouth situation where he's like, Israel, stop bombing hospitals. Come on, like, don't do that. But while also simultaneously saying there's no red lines and we are going to keep giving you as many weapons and as many munitions as possible. The idea that these wars wouldn't be happening if Trump was in office is also a silly one. Anyone that tries to say that Donald Trump would be better than Joe Biden on any of these issues is a ridiculous person. I'm sorry. That is not an argument that you can make and have me take you seriously if you're going to make that argument. Donald Trump is part of the reason why we're in this mess to begin with. Okay? I'm sorry. That is a ridiculous argument. Hillary Clinton is awful. Hillary Clinton is a warmonger. I do not believe Hillary Clinton would have allowed the embassy to move to Jerusalem. I do not believe that Hillary Clinton would have come out with a silly Abraham Accords style situation in the same way that the Trump administration did. You are crazy if you think that she would. Hillary Clinton loves a good genocide, okay? She's a big fan. Okay? Hillary Clinton, very reactionary towards Iran. But Hillary Clinton also, simultaneously, more of a realist when it comes to what we are engaging with. Okay?